The story begins with Rui, a 15-year-old boy who still doesn't have magical powers and is frequently bullied by his friend Helena. Helena is Rui's friend and intimidates him in every possible way because he lacks magical abilities. On this day, Helena, as usual, mocks Rui. In this world, almost everyone has at least some unique magical power, while Rui did not, which made him very upset. Additionally, Rui had problems not only with magic but also with sports, which made him even more upset. Unlike Rui, Helena learned to use magic at the age of 3, and during the growing process, Helena's number of magical abilities increased more and more. Furthermore, Rui became even more upset not only because of Helena's superiority but also because she could never understand all of his pain. Helena also trained Rui in magic, hoping that sooner or later he could also gain some kind of magical power. However, Rui was not very happy with the fact that it was Helena who was training him, which the girl did not like. At a certain point, Rui simply cannot bear all the constant attacks surrounding him, so he tells Helena that today he wants to practice magic alone. Helena was surprised by this decision and starts a fight with Rui in which she says that people like him can never learn magic on their own, trying to provoke Rui to fight with her. At one point, Helena collapses and tells Rui that since he is unable to even use the simplest magic, then he is as miserable as his deceased parents. These words touched Rui's soul deeply, as his parents died a long time ago when Rui was still very young. So, Rui, unable to contain all his anger with Helena, tells her that from now on he will no longer meet with her. Helena couldn't believe what she heard, simply stunned. Rui said he didn't even see Helena as a friend anymore because he was very annoyed with her arrogant behavior. With these words, Rui ran away from Helena towards the forest while Helena herself could not believe everything that had been said above. After this unpleasant conversation, Rui, after a while, managed to reach the forest where he decided to start practicing magic to prepare to cast the spell. Rui tries to use wind magic, however, as before, he is unsuccessful, which leaves him extremely disappointed with himself. Rui still couldn't stop thinking about what Helena had said about his parents. A little later, Rui regains his composure and continues to try to invoke wind magic. After several attempts, Rui again began to think that as usual he was not succeeding. Rui also realized that a different atmosphere prevailed in the forest recently. Rui thinks that the atmosphere in the forest became different because of the monsters that may live in this forest. He decides to leave the forest as quickly as possible. As Rui began to leave, he saw a very strange and bright hole in the ground from which emanated a very strong magic that even he could feel. Rui decides to go back and tell everyone about the hole, but due to negligence, he falls into the same hole. After the fall, Rui briefly loses consciousness. After a few minutes, he wakes up and sees that he is in some strange place where at first glance there was nothing. After waking up, Rui begins to remember everything that happened to him before he got there. While Rui was thinking, a beautiful and voluptuous woman in a revealing black outfit appeared behind him. Rui was very confused by the sight of the woman as he had never met such beautiful women in his life. Upon closer inspection, Rui realizes that the woman has small horns on her head, believing her to be a demoness. Rui had read in a book that demons are extremely cruel and cunning creatures who can control very strong magic. The beautiful woman confirmed Rui's guess, telling him that he immediately guessed that she was a demoness. Confused, Rui awkwardly introduces himself to the demoness and says that it was the first time he had seen a demoness like her. The demoness was very surprised by whose courage despite the elders of her village telling children about demons who are very dangerous to people. Despite this, Hui said that apparently he was not intimidated by this demoness because she was very beautiful. With these words, the demoness was very embarrassed because in the last thousands of years no one had ever praised her for anything, especially for her beauty. Rui realized how embarrassed the demoness was and immediately began to apologize to her for such unexpected words. After that, another girl appeared behind Rui who was already smaller and bronze-skinned, and she also had a long scaly tail and wings. Rui greeted the girl, which she did not like at all but was surprised by his courage. After that, the girl introduces herself as the 7th Dragon Queen. Upon hearing this, Rui became very worried since dragons were considered the most powerful race in the world. The girl was pleased with the way she introduced herself to Rui, thus surprising him very much. After that, the girl asked Rui if he knew who this demoness was. Upon hearing this, the demoness remembers that she never introduced herself to Rui. Then the woman introduces herself as Deroa, the 66th demon queen who rules over all the darkness and chaos of this world. After that, Roy was extremely scared and very shocked by what he heard at the same time. However, Roy still didn't fully understand if they really could be the Demon Queen and the Dragon Queen. Goddess thought that Roy and there was no way a Demon Queen just because he thought she was pretty while the Queen. Dragon didn't understand how easily Roy got embarrassed by her compliments. After that they started a small argument in which Roy thought they got along well with each other and probably were even friends. During this argument they both decided to reincarnate and show Roy their true form. In the process of reincarnation, Dara's clothes were torn almost completely while the Dragon Queen's outfit had completely disappeared. A scaly and hard layer began to appear in some places. At this moment Roy felt an extremely powerful flow of magic energy that he had never felt before. After reincarnation, the Dragon Queen turned into a huge and formidable dragon, and Deos found a new outfit even more revealing than before. After that Roy became completely convinced that there was a Demon Queen and a Queen Dragon before him. Roy remembered a legend in which there lived a hero a long time ago who had talent for magic, fencing and a kind disposition. Once this hero saved the world from the Queen of Dragons and the Queen of Demons, saving people from their villainy, after which he himself disappeared. Then Roy realized that these were the same Dragon Queen and Demon Queen that Siroi had imprisoned here. However, Roy didn't understand why they weren't defeated but only imprisoned here. At the time he assumed that the Queen of Dragons and the Queen of Demons were so strong that he couldn't defeat them completely but only imprison them in this empty space. Then he thought maybe they knew how to get out of here and decided to ask them about it. After Roy's question, Diosa told him that getting out of here was simply impossible. Then Roy became desperate to spend the rest of his life there. The Dragon Queen just added that if they knew how to get out of here they wouldn't be here anymore. After that the Dragon Queen decides to show Roy her seal that she received when she arrived here. The Dragon Queen said that this seal was placed on them by the hero who left them here in captivity for many years. She also added that it is because of this seal that their souls are now intimately linked to this place. Then Roy began to search for this seal on his body, and as it turned out he didn't have such a seal. Then Diosa began to undress Roy to try to find the imprisonment seal on him. As it turned out Roy really didn't have any seal and no one knew why he didn't have one. Then Roy said he got here after falling into a strange hole in the ground. Roa thought he came here because of an inexplicable accident. Roa also suggested that he could still get out of here. Hearing this, Roy said he was ready to do anything to get out of this strange place. Hearing this, the Dragon Queen and the Demon Queen were surprised by whose high promises. In turn he didn't fully understand what exactly they wanted from him. Then Diosa said that Roy could make a hole in this place through which he could get out. Roy then he said he couldn't use magic on his own, so he couldn't make a hole in this space. Diosa told Roy that he couldn't not use magic at all. Then Daiso offers to train Roy to increase his powers. Magic for a better understanding of H explained to Roy that magic is like a muscle and the more he uses it the more stronger it becomes, but despite this if he overexerts himself his magic can completely run out, so he can die from it. Roa also added that for the most effective training he will have to bring his condition almost to death as often as possible. Roa said that 500 years of training would be enough for Roy, which shocked him a lot, thinking he simply wouldn't live. Then the Queen of Dragons told Roy that time is different here, that here 1 year is equivalent to 1 day on Earth, so if Roy spends 500 years in this space only 500 days will pass on Earth. The Queen of Dragons said that if they train him he will be able to get out of here. Roy thought they wouldn't help him just like that, so they said that in exchange he would help them get out, and he couldn't refuse such an outcome of events. The next day Diosa started Roy's training, for which he was very grateful. Roa reminded Roy that it would take him 500 years to get all the strongest magical techniques. Roy wanted to know if time in this place really passed as the Queen of Dragons said. Diosa said that this was true and that she herself once checked it with the help of magic. Then Roy remembered the elder in the village who took care of him when his parents died. He thought the elder would be worried about him and that after all this training he would definitely go back to him. He told Roa that he would do his best to get out of here as soon as possible. After saying that, she stroked Hu's head, praising his aspiration. You remembered how before his mother died she also your head gave Roy a pleasant warm sensation that he hadn't felt for a long time. However, Dios apologized to his father if he died here, making Roy's emotional mood turn even more depressing. While training with Dios, Roy practiced his magical skills for a long time. From such training, Roy crawled to the Dragon Queen completely exhausted. The Dragon Queen noticed from Roy's softened state that he was being taught very well. As soon as Roy regained his strength, the Dragon Queen was ready to train him. She said she would train Roy not in magic, but in a special Kaian technique. The technique was unique because it completely revealed the potential of any magician. There were very few people in the human world who used the Kaian technique, but this technique was not inferior to common magic in strength. The Dragon Queen told Rui that if he mastered this technique, he could easily defeat even a dragon. The study of the Kaian technique is based on 9 exercises that are divided into attack and defense exercises. Anyone who manages to master all the exercises will be able to overcome any difficulty in their path. Rui didn't understand why no one used such powerful magic. The Dragon Queen explained that this technique is very difficult to master. She also explained that in recent years it has become much easier for people to use magic, and everyone can safely use basic magic, while Kaian techniques need to be studied diligently for years. This didn't scare Rui much because for him, Kaian training should be as difficult as regular magic training. The Dragon Queen also added that a person doesn't need any talent to learn Kaian techniques, and that all training was based on meticulous training. Hui said he would do his best and could hardly wait to start training. However, the Dragon Queen didn't mention that Rui would have to memorize everything he learned. After an explanation, Dios appeared to them and said that the training program would change every week. The Dragon Queen thought that Hu should learn Kaian before Doroa could teach him to use magic. 10 years later, Rui ended up in hell. His magical abilities became much stronger. Der was happy with the result of his training but also understood that Rui needed to continue training. Der acknowledged all of Ru's progress and saw how he became a true magician. Boza was also surprised at how Rui never showed signs of fatigue during all the time of his continuous training. At the end of the training, Doroa told Rui that it was enough for today, but Rui claimed he could still continue despite his almost total lack of magical energy. Dios thought Rui had an unhealthy desire to master magical abilities, so she decided to tell him that he strives too hard to prove himself in all his training. She also added that despite how weak the wizard he was in his world, all his efforts brought him results. After that, Dios decided to transfer some of her magical energy to him through his magical channel. She explained to him that wizards like him had very little magical energy, so she could only transfer a little magical energy to him. She also explained that if he didn't use this magic, then his magical power would weaken, and over time he wouldn't be able to use his magic at all, which scared Rui a lot. After that, Dios started the process of transferring magical energy to Rui. While she was transferring part of her magical energy to him, she noticed that during all the time of his training, Ru's magical channels were more stretched compared to other people. After transferring magical energy, Dios continued to tell Rui that with each training, he and his magic were getting stronger. At first, such words from Dios touched Rui a lot since no one had ever praised him so much as now. A little later, he calmed down and told Dios that he was very pleased to hear such warm words of support. Rui also said that he was very happy to have come to this place and be with them, affectionately calling Der's sister. She was incredibly embarrassed by what Rui had called her, causing her to simply faint at first. Rui was very worried about Doroa, but the Dragon Queen told him that she was just crazy and would soon come to herself. After seeing this, the Dragon Queen told Rui to rest before training with her. During the training, Rui managed to do push-ups with a very heavy stone on his back. After that, the Dragon Queen told Rui to rest before the next exercise. She was pleasantly surprised by the appearance of the first visible results of his training. She also pointed out how after 10 years of training, Hu was able to master the Kaian technique. While thinking about Hu's skills, she noticed how he continued to hide from her and do push-ups, which she didn't like very much. She was very unhappy with this behavior, telling Rui that he shouldn't exert himself too much under any circumstances. Rui said that because he was extremely weak in his world, he should train as much as possible. The Dragon Queen told him that all this was absurd and that his constitution physics was more than strong and durable, which Rui simply didn't believe. He said he was the weakest and slowest in his world and that the Dragon Queen wouldn't be able to understand him because she was too strong. The Dragon Queen realized that Rui was a child with complexes and needed to fix that somehow. So she tells Rui that thanks to his effort, his constitution is getting stronger with each training. She explained to him that he considered himself weak just because before he simply didn't know how efficiently he could use his body. She also drew attention to the fact that his body has a very efficient regeneration, and he should be grateful to nature for being born so strong. Rui was deeply touched by the words of the Dragon Queen about his unique constitution. After that, he decides to ask the Dragon Queen about her parents. She replied that her parents died when she was very young and that she didn't even remember their faces. After this question, Rui began to feel a little embarrassed after his question, thinking it was unpleasant for her to remember. But instead, the Dragon Queen just laughed and told Roy not to think about it and that she also had a strong body that she received after birth. After that, Roy couldn't contain his emotions and ran into the arms of the Dragon Queen, thinking to himself that they had a lot in common. She didn't completely understand what was happening, to which Roy replied that she also worked hard. After that, the Dragon Queen realized what exactly was happening, and after a quick hug, she began to calm him down. After that, Roy felt better and said that in his time, the Dragon Queen was like he used to be, and that he wouldn't complain anymore. At that moment, Diyoza had already managed to return to herself, and she understood that everything had worked out between them. In the 100th year of his stay in the endless hell, Roy became much stronger, and he could even use some magic tricks. He wanted to show the results to the Dragon Queen and called her Rio. Then she remembered how Roy once asked if she had any previous name when she terrorized people. Everyone knew her as the Dragon Queen, and no one saw her as a person. After hearing this, he decided to call her Rio by name. Roy took Rio out of his thoughts and wanted to know if his magic had improved. Rio also said that his magical abilities had become much stronger compared to what he demonstrated in past training. After that, Rio began to praise Roy for being able to master half of all offensive and defensive movements in just 100 years. Later, Roy told Rio that every time she touched him, his heart beat faster. Rio was shocked by what she heard while Roy continued to say that her skin is very soft and that she smells delicious. Roy didn't stop praising Rio, which made her increasingly embarrassed. After that, she started hitting Roy for what he had just said to her, considering him a pervert. Roy didn't quite understand what he had said about her, thinking he had said too much at this moment. While thinking about what Roy had just said to her, she also thought about how he was embarrassing her at that moment. Diyoza approached them so she could discuss some issues with Rio about additional training, so Roy decides to leave Diyoza with Rio and continue training away from them. Diyoza drew Rio's attention to how they had become friends during training. She reminded Rio of how before Roy was there, they were constantly fighting to the death. Then they both realized how the endless hell had changed since Roy's appearance. Then Diyoza thought about how everything had become so fun for them from that moment on. After that, Roy decides to approach Der Roa with a question about his magical abilities. However, instead of listening to Roy, she tells him not to call her by her first name again. Roy then tries to remember how he should address Der Roa. When he remembered, he called her Dion and Chan, which almost made Der Roa faint. After that, Der Roa turned to Roy with open arms, and after that, Roy and Der Roa began a training session where Roy showed her his ability to use his fire magic. Der Roa was very pleased with how strong his abilities had become after 100 years in an endless hell. However, despite such a rapid increase in abilities, their celebration moment is getting closer and closer. At that moment, Roy runs to her to find out if she is satisfied with her abilities. But when Roy runs to Diyoza, he realizes that she has started crying. Roy was very upset because his little sister started crying suddenly. Diyoza, in turn, didn't stop crying and hugged Roy tightly, telling him that she was crying because of him. Without repressing her emotions, she promised herself that she would definitely bring him back to her world even if they never saw each other again for 300 years in an endless hell. Roy managed to learn to use the Black Flame, one of the most complex and powerful spells during all those 300 years of ROA and Rio training. They were pleased that Roy was able to master the magic that only high-ranking demons could use. Da explained that she used to transfer part of her magical energy to Roy through magical channels from time to time so that he could use his magical abilities more effectively. She was extremely satisfied with how quickly Roy was able to master such complex spells. Rio said that in his training Roy is also making great progress and that he mastered all of Cheyenne's abilities after the ROA and our training. Once again praised Roy for his efforts and dedication. After training, Roy noticed that it was getting late and that it was time for everyone to go to sleep. With what Diyoza and Arv agreed. A second later Roy fell to the ground due to an unpleasant pain in his chest, and Diyoza and Rio immediately tried to figure out what happened to him. When they took off their outer clothes they noticed a barely visible gray military mark on him. Roy was scared while Der Roa and Rio were happy for him because such a mark appears only on professional warriors. Then Roy calmed down and wanted to know If Roa and Rio had similar marks, then Diosa raised her clothes a bit so that Roe could see her mark. She said that it represented the royal mark, which was of a higher status than the military mark, and showed that the owner of such a mark was worthy of the royal title. Rio also showed his mark on his palm, which meant it belonged to the royal family. Then Hui decides to find out what exactly is written on his military mark. Roa and read the content of the tag, and it was written that Roe is a demon and dragon warrior. With what he heard, Diosa was very happy and proud of Roy, immediately started hugging him tightly. However, Rio said that this mark is not complete and must be silver to be fully completed. Who felt that to complete it he must train more and more. However, Rio said that his current body had reached the point where it should be at his age. In infinite hell no one ages, therefore whose body does not grow, which means he will not be able to exceed his maximum power limit of his magical abilities, and the only way to overcome this limit is to leave infinite hell. Roa tells Roy that now his abilities are more than enough to leave endless hell, so Roy decides to rest today and tomorrow he will try to leave a little later. Roy returns to the small house where he lived on vacation and gains strength. In a dream, Roy accidentally grabs something very large, soft and nice to the touch. When he wakes up he sees Roa in his front of Luri that he was holding by the chest. All the time Roa was very surprised that Roy decided to immediately hold her. This sight scared Roy a lot and he didn't understand what was happening. After that Roy was attacked by who was also in Luri. Roy was still embarrassed by this appearance of Roa and he still didn't understand exactly what they wanted to do with him. Then explained to him that as he would leave them tomorrow, she and should somehow say goodbye. Said that her strength and knowledge are not all they can give to Roy, so they told Roy that they could also give him their first time. After saying this, Joe immediately kissed Roy, which left him very excited. After the kiss, Roa continued to tell Roy how much she loved him. After Roa and Rio also started kissing Roy, showing all their affection for him. After the kiss, Roa drew attention to how embarrassed Rio was, which she denied. After that another fight started between Roa and Ru, in which they began to make up excuses, saying that this was happening for the first time. Roy could only silently watch their fight on the sidelines. After the discussion stopped, both were ready to move on to the defenseless Roy. Roy was very embarrassed and scared by the situation he involuntarily found himself in. However, Roa and Rio were already uncontrollable and ready to continue their fun with Roy. The next day Diosa and Rio explained to Roy that they needed him to leave endless hell. Roy just looked at Roa and laughed and thought about the day he was there. He couldn't forget the first exercises that tormented him to death. He couldn't forget those moments with Roa and Rio when he had so much fun with them. Roy knew those days of his life had come to an end and that today he would return home. After that Roy began to prepare one of his spells that would create a hole in space through which he would return home before Roy could create the portal. Interrupts his spell to give him something important. Rio gives Roy his dragon fawn earring so that he can use it to create a hole in space. Rio tells Roy to take his earring and channel all his magical power into it. Roy took Rio's earring, directed his magical power into it in his hands. Instead of an earring he found a dragon sword. Roy was surprised by the strength of the magical power coming from his sword. Informed Roy that it was not a simple sword but a relic of his father made from his fangs. She also added that there are only 2 swords of this type in the whole world, and she gives one of these swords to Roy as a memento of them. Roy wanted to say that he couldn't accept such a gift from Rio, but she didn't listen and interrupted him. Rio continued to say that he was giving him this relic for a reason and that he should fully understand that if he didn't want to accept it. Roy then changed his mind and decided to accept the sword, promising Rio that he would appreciate it. Rio was pleased with Hu's decision and then explained to him how to properly use the sword. After a few minutes, Roy was ready to use the sword to cut through the space between the human world and the endless hell. Roy began to concentrate all his magical power on the sword, after which he made a strong and confident strike. After the impact, a large crack appeared in the air from which a bright light emerged. As the crack grew, Roy was already beginning to bid farewell to Roa and Rio without holding back his emotions. Before leaving, the 3 began to hug each other. Diosa wished Roy a safe journey and to be careful when returning to his world. Wished Roy good luck and said they would always be waiting for his return. Roy couldn't believe it was the end and that, after passing through the crack, he would finally find himself in his own world. He also thought that he would definitely free them from the endless hell to continue living with them. Before returning to his world, he told Diosa and Rio that he would definitely free them from here. Diosa and Rio just watched Roy, who was already leaving them, and a second later, Roy passed through the crack, after which it closed, letting Diosa know that Rui had left them. Rio told der Roa that they were now alone in an endless hell for the first time in 300 years. Then Dios grabbed Rio and started crying, which Rio did not expect from her at all. Der Roa continued talking about how much she was already missing Rui, so Rio began trying to calm her down, thinking to herself that she had never done that before. Rio never ceased to be surprised that the Queen of Demons was capable of such emotions. When Diosa calmed down a bit, she decided to ask R if she missed Rui. R said she believed in Rui and didn't feel as lonely as before because she had Rui. After der Roa had told her feelings, they dominated her again. Then she started to hug Rio tightly, calling her cute. Then der Roa told Rio that if she felt lonely, they urgently needed to hug each other. After that, Diosa began to hug Rio firmly, who tried to fight her in every possible way. Rio became more and more anxious for Rui to return to them as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Rui was between dimensions through which he needed to reach his world. Rui also missed Ten and laughed that he wouldn't see him soon. However, he composed himself and thought he would definitely save him shortly. He then found another crack that should take him to his world. Rui then took out the sword that Ru gave him and struck the crack with it to make it bigger. When he widened the crack and passed through it, he found himself in the same forest where he found a hole in the ground through which he fell into the endless hell. It wasn't until seconds later that Rui finally realized he was finally home. Rui's happiness was simply limitless, and he decided not to hesitate and return to his native village. However, during his stay in the endless hell, he managed to forget the way home. At first, Rui wanted to climb a tree and look around, but as soon as Rui jumped, he was at a very high altitude. From such a height, Rui could look around and see the sea and his native village nearby. As soon as Rui saw all this beauty, he realized how small the world he lived in before was. At first, Rui wondered how he could save der Roa and Rio, but he wasn't entirely sure he would succeed. So Rui planned to return home first to make sure nothing had changed since his disappearance. After arriving home, Hui prepared some things and was about to go to a very important place for him. This place turned out to be a large stone where his mother and father were buried. Rui apologized for his long absence and said that next time he would introduce Diosa and Rio to them. At that moment, Rui was followed by an elder who had raised and cared for him after his parents' death. The elder wanted to ask Rui where he had been missing all this time, to which Rui replied that it was a very long story. Hui apologized to the elder for being absent for so long and was very happy to see him. Then the elder invited Rui to go to him to have something warm, but Rui in turn created a large fireball and told the elder that he needed to go. The elder was shocked at how Rui was able to create such a fireball so easily. Rui said he was okay and that he was not as weak as before now. The elder saw in Rui's eyes an unprecedented confidence in his abilities and also said he would take care of Rui's house. Rui thanked the elder for his concern, after which he went about his business while Rui walked. Helena noticed him immediately and started telling Rui how angry she was with him. Helena thought that since Rui had returned, he wanted to make amends with her. Rui told Helena that his arrogance hadn't changed since she had left and that she should finally grow up. Helena was shocked by what Rui said to her since before his disappearance he didn't behave so boldly with her. Helena in a fit of rage immediately decided that Rui should answer for his words and was already preparing to attack him. However, against all of Helena's expectations, Rui manages to repel her attack without receiving any scratches. Helena was perplexed at how Rui managed to stop one of her strongest attacks. Rui told Helena that she couldn't see anyone around her and that she couldn't see the people around her getting stronger while her abilities remained at the same level. So Helena gets even more irritated and she again tries to inflict at least some damage to Rui. However, despite her swift attacks, Rui still manages to dodge each one of her attacks, and after that Rui decides to use one of the Kaiyan techniques, during which he delivers an enhanced kick to Helena's face. After such a strong blow, Helena fell to the ground, but even after that she didn't stop commanding Rui, telling him to hold on. Instead, Rui just bids farewell to Helena, telling her not to obstruct other people's path again. Helena still didn't stop shouting after Rui that sooner or later she would still be with him on the path. Rui remembers a conversation with der Roa and Rwi, who discussed a plan for Rui to get them out of an endless hell. Goddess suggested first finding some information about the hero who imprisoned them, because only he knows how to remove them from the seals. Rui presumed that this hero must have died already, but Rio said that his relatives or his family might also know how they can be freed from here. So Rui decides that when he gets back home he will have to find the grandchildren of the hero. Along the way, Rui decides to first find out about the hero's grandchildren with the people in Iskador, the capital of the continent. However, Rui didn't know in which direction The capital was located and he decides to find a large accumulation of magic. The magic search technique is most commonly used by demons while humans need a lot of magical energy to master this technique, so Rui focuses all his strength on using this magic to find large accumulations of magic that may come from the capital. After casting, Rui finds a large accumulation of magic, thinking it's in that direction that the capital is located. After Rui discovers the approximate location of the capital, he decides to use the flying leap, a Xian technique that allows him to reach a very high speed. Rui just took a small jump forward. He was already able to cover a very large distance in a matter of seconds. After several enhanced jumps like this, Rui decided to rest a bit, but when Rui stopped he noticed a long line in front of him that was moving towards the entrance of the capital. Rui was a little worried because he had never been to the capital before and didn't know what to expect. Finally, it was Rui's turn and a knight demanded that Rui show his migration card. The knight realized that Rui didn't have any migration card and demanded that Rui leave the line. Rui was confused because no one had told him before that he should have some kind of migration card. Rui started to worry more every second, trying somehow to get out of the situation. The knight thought that Rui was going to enter the magic academy, but Rui didn't fully understand what the knight was talking about, so the knight told Rui to hurry, because the admission exam at the academy would start very soon. Then the knight let Rui into the capital and wished him luck in the exams. Rui was happy and at the same time also didn't understand why that knight was still missing him. Rui was in the capital for the first time in his life and he simply was amazed at how beautiful everything was there. Rui heard from adults that there were many people living in the capital, but there were much more than he thought. Rui went to one of the signs so that he could know some places in the capital. To the right of the sign, Rui saw a commercial area where people were selling various things since morning. To the left was the same academy that the knight had mentioned. Rui always dreamed of entering that academy and studying in it, but now he wasn't up to it. At first Rui wanted to find out something about the hero's relatives at the bar because you can always find various useful information there, but as he was still a child, he would be quickly expelled from there, so Rui thinks about going to a guild where he can have the opportunity to earn money by completing various requests and can also get a migration card with which he can travel to other cities and countries. After thinking a bit, Rui decides to join a guild and become an adventurer. Then a brave old woman appeared near Rui who thought Rui got lost on the way to the academy, so the woman grabbed Rui and dragged him forcefully towards the academy. On the way the woman told Rui that the academy was made to compete directly with the empire that is growing larger every year. She also told Rui Kiri could easily pass the academy exam without presenting any documents. Balcos. Minutes later, they arrived at the very academy where the admission exams are taking place now. Rui already understood that he was now in a hopeless situation and now had no choice but to go for the exam. On the other hand, Rui wasn't upset about managing to get there. After Rui went to the counter, behind which one of the teachers was accepting new students remotely, Rui noticed targets hovering in the air on which new students displayed their magical abilities. One of the teachers told Rui that he needs to show his magical abilities, where he can use absolutely any magic. Rui noticed that a girl couldn't hit the targets with her magical abilities. Rui genuinely felt sorry for her while the other candidates laughed at her and said she was completely inept. The next to show his magical abilities was Rui. Initially, Rui wasn't going to show his full strength but decided to show everyone what he had learned from Diosa and Ru at that moment. The others didn't understand who he was and which village he came from. The professor instructed Rui to begin, and Rui created a huge fireball that should knock down all the targets at once. The others were shocked by what they saw and didn't understand how Rui could use such powerful magic. After Rui used the magic, a large hole formed in the ground from which a lot of smoke emerged while the others were scared of such magic. Rui was more than happy with his result. Rui decides to ask the professor if he succeeded, but the professor at that moment was lying unconscious on the floor. So Rui decides to ask another professor if he will be accepted with such abilities, to which the professor replied in shock that he may be accepted, after which Rui was sent to the next exam. Rui was very ashamed of the interest with which the others were talking about him at that moment. Yuri decided to address Rui, one of those who also decided to enter the academy. Rui didn't understand what a handsome man like Yuri wanted to know from a country boy like him. Rui greeted Yuri and said he was very happy to meet him, to which Yuri returned. After meeting Yuri, Rui decides to start immediately communicating with Yuri Tai since everyone here was exactly the same. Rui was very surprised by Yuri's expressive smile, thinking to himself that the girls were constantly after Yuri. Yuri draws Rui's attention to how many new unusual students are entering the academy this year. Yuri also told Rui that he thought she would be better among the new students, although Rui didn't quite understand who Yuri was talking about. Rui decides to ask Yuri about who exactly he is talking about, saying that he entered the academy very recently. At first, Yuri thought a bit, but shortly after, he and Rui returned to the topic of conversation again. Rui wants to know from Yuri how strong she is, to which Yuri replies that she is the granddaughter of the same hero. Rui was shocked by what he heard, since he didn't expect at all that the granddaughter of the hero himself would study there. So Rui decides to ask Yuri what she is like, which surprised him a lot at first. Almost immediately, the hero's granddaughter reveals herself next to Rui and Yuri as soon as she appeared. She immediately asked Rui if he was the same new student everyone was talking about now. When Rui told the hero's granddaughter that it was him, she told him that he seemed extremely pathetic. Then Yuri decides to intervene in the matter, saying that she doesn't need to insult Rui. After that, Yuri introduces Rui to Charlotte Dyla, the granddaughter of the legendary hero. Rui immediately recalls moments of his life when he admired the hero and his actions. He also thought that the Queen of Demons and the Queen of Dragons were not as described in the legends, but very, very kind creatures. Dyla interrupts Rui's thoughts and tells him that she won't let some boy just take her place in the academy. Then Yuri tells Dyla that all the exams have already ended and that there is no way to change the situation. Then Dyla puts her hand on her chest and takes off a white glove. After she takes off the glove, she throws it at Rui and challenges him to a duel. Everyone around was shocked by the fact that the granddaughter of the legendary hero challenged a simple country boy. Dyla tells Rui that if she defeats him, he will refuse to continue to enter the academy. If Rui still manages to defeat Dyla, then she will become his personal slave. Yuri tried with all her might to persuade Rui not to accept the challenge because it would be a completely irrational decision. On the one hand, Rui thought that he didn't need a slave, but on the other hand, he had the opportunity to learn something about the hero from Dyla despite Yuri's persuasion. Rui raises the glove and thus accepts Dyla's challenge to participate in a duel. After a few minutes, Rui and Dyla were already ready to start the battle while the rest of the students watched everything. Hells, one of the professors at the academy, was very worried about the duel because if there were victims among the students, he could suffer severe punishment. Yuri then reassured the professor, saying that he assumed full responsibility because he knew that the professor also wanted to know how Rui was. However, Yuri said that the professor should also judge what initially didn't please him very much. After that, Hell leaves and dictates the rules of the duel in which the winner will be the one. The opponent lost consciousness or surrendered voluntarily. The professor also added that he could end the fight if he considered one of the opponents no longer fit to continue. Talia Russ also reminded the duel participants of those they killed during the forbidden battle. After that, Hells announced the beginning of the duel. Gilia thought that if Rui surrendered as quickly as possible, then the duel would end quickly after the duel announcement. After the duel, Dyla drew her sword with which she would defeat Rui. Initially, Rui was also going to draw his sword, which Rio left for him, but he remembered her words that Rui should only use his sword when there was a real threat to his life. So Rui changed his mind about using the dragon sword in the duel and decided to duel barehanded, which surprised Gilia. At first, Gilia was ready to attack Rui with the first blow, never forgetting that she was the granddaughter of the legendary hero. After that, Dyla, with all her anger, ran towards unarmed Rui, so Rui reached out and used the golden cocoon technique, which completely absorbed all the damage from the blow. Judia was shocked at how Rui was able to deflect the blow from her sword, which could cut steel with ease. After repelling the blow, Rui said that he was not a demon king, not a dragon king, not even a hero, nor the grandson of a hero, but that he was just an ordinary boy from the village. Dyla was still shocked by how easily Rui countered his attack with bare hands. The golden cocoon technique makes only a specific area of the wizard harder and more durable, while the steel cocoon technique makes the whole body of the wizard hard, but at the same time, his defense is less durable than that of the golden cocoon. Furthermore, the golden cocoon does not interfere with the free movement of the protected limb, making it very effective. Dyla tried again to inflict some damage on Rui, but he was able to easily repel this attack as well. Gilia did not understand how Rui could so easily deflect her blows since she was a skilled swordsman. So she decides to change her strategy to use many petal blades instead of a sword, which flew towards Rui. But despite the speed and quantity of these blades, Roe was able to dodge each blade without difficulty. Then Yu decides to use a myriad of these blades so that they certainly hit Roe and neutralize him. The professor thought it was too much and decided to stop the duel, but Yuri decided to stop the professor. Yuri drew the professor's attention to how confident and calm Hu's posture was, which could mean he could handle this easily. Roe was surprised at how many petals were flying towards him and felt that he needed to use very strong magic here. So Roe decides not to run away from the petals but rather to run towards these petals. Then Hu takes a high leap and uses a magical technique of a wide flame that burned all the petals flying towards him. Gilly was in unimaginable shock at how Roe could deflect both sword and magical attacks so easily. Then Dyla was overwhelmed by childhood memories when she trained hard with her father. Her father told her about the hero's mark that no one could obtain, and he told her that if she trained hard enough, sooner or later she would achieve such a mark, which in turn motivated her greatly. After that, a crowd of adults gathered beside her, who in every way touched her and said that she would definitely become the same heroine as her grandfather. Dyla promised that she would train all the time and that when she grew up, she would become a true heroine who would protect civilians from various threats. Gathering her thoughts, Dyla was about to attack Roe again with another blow. Moments before impact, Dyla was determined not to let Roe take her place in the academy. At the moment of impact, Roe uses the golden cocoon technique again to deflect the entire attack once again. Then Roe remembered those very moments of his life when Helena mocked him in every possible way, believing that he had absolutely no talent to master magic. At that moment, Roe thought that Dyla had also had a very hard time before and that she had dedicated all her time to training to become one of the best. So Hu decides to apply another Cheyenne technique, the golden sword grab, with which he not only blocks Yuta's next attack but also grabs the sword in his palm. Dyla was very scared at how Roe managed to grab her weapon so easily with bare hands. After grabbing the sword, Roe prepares to use the next meteor fist Cheyenne test, which greatly increased the power of his fist attacks. Dyla considered these to be her last seconds of life and that she was unable to defeat Roe. However, Hu's fist manages to stop her fist a few inches from Gila's face, leaving her stunned. Roe decided to convince Dyla that the duel was over in his favor and that they no longer needed to continue the battle. Then Dyla became very scared and started crying, not understanding how Roe managed to defeat her so easily. Roe was very scared by Dyla's condition in which she is now. Then Roe realized that no one is with them now, so he decides to create a small dark space where no one can notice them. Then a large black cube appears in front of the others through which Roe and Dyla could not be seen. After that, Roe decides to check Dyla's condition